Cassandra Haddad, and I come from a family that has been devastated by SOD1 A5V ALS. Next slide, please. The theme Through the Looking Glass feels like the perfect metaphor for my experience. When I turned 40, I felt like I was on top of the world. I had a beautiful family, a thriving career, and despite the challenges of a global pandemic, I finally knew who I was and where I was headed. I thought my 40s would be amazing. Then I fell through the looking glass when my uncle, the first of my mother's generation, was diagnosed with ALS. Despite an extensive family history, no one had been diagnosed since my grandfather passed in 1990. It had been quiet for almost 20 years, but little did we know it was the calm before the storm. My world was flipped upside down. My mother underwent genetic testing and shortly after developed ALS symptoms, the very day her brother died. I also underwent genetic testing and discovered I was impacted too. Layer upon layer of generational trauma and grief shook my very foundation. I was lost, no longer the strong, confident woman who had been smiling down her 40s. But today, I'm proud to say in the 2 years since my mother has passed, I've emerged from the other side of that looking glass. I've weathered the storm. And now I'm even fiercer. Because as you all know, nothing is as relentless as ALS. It demands that I be fiercer, stronger, smarter, faster than it is. I've come out ready to fight, not just for those with ALS now, but for those at risk like myself and for our children who may be at risk in the future. The word fierce can be defined as ferocious aggressiveness, but it can also mean a heartfelt and powerful intensity. And that's the kind of fierce that I choose to stare down ALS with. Next slide. ALS makes you feel like you've lived several lifetimes. I think of my adult life in 3 phases: before, during, and after ALS entered our lives. This slide is a glimpse into the before. I was a nurse, then a nurse practitioner. I married a wonderful man, and together we had twins. Life was busy, but it was full and rich. I was truly blessed. Next slide. During the storm of ALS, I became an amateur detective, a researcher, an advocate, and a caregiver for my mother. Pictured here is my grandfather, Harold Lindsay, who passed in 1990 before our gene was discovered, my uncle, Dwayne Lindsay, who encouraged my mother to get genetic testing, and my mother, Cynthia Weber. In the bottom left, you'll see her receiving the very first dose of expanded access tofersen, thanks to Dr. Colin Quinn, or as we like to call it, emergency access. Now, don't get me wrong. I would go back to the before days in a heartbeat. I would never want to relive the during, and I'm sure many of you here understand that sentiment all too well. But I stand before you today to say that after isn't all bad. This is where the magic happened. As someone who will likely face genetic ALS myself, I began my advocacy journey. I channeled my grief from losing my mother and the sense of powerlessness that comes with a genetic diagnosis into action. I leaned into research participation, shared our story through interviews and social media, and joined forces with other fierce advocates. Next slide, please. I've spent over 20 years in healthcare, over half my life, and my perspective on ALS comes from a unique triple lens. As a caregiver, an at-risk person, and a clinician. This complex Venn diagram that represents my life has shaped my advocacy in ways I never expected. I'm privileged to be part of End the Legacy, the only organization dedicated solely to the genetic ALS and FTD community. We conduct original research, provide community education and support, present posters, and speak at conferences around the world. In addition to my work with End the Legacy, I attended Curly and am now a research ambassador, which has given me incredible opportunities to do things like serve on patient advocacy committees. But what I'm most proud of is I've been able to apply both my clinical skills and lived experience to help start the first dedicated clinic for those at genetic risk of ALS and FTD alongside Dr. Terry Hyman Patterson and the ALS Hope Foundation at Temple. Like so many in the ALS and FTD community, I've asked the question, why me? Why my family? I don't have an answer, but what I do know is every experience I've had has led me here to this clinic. My professional path from ER nursing to nursing education, to family practice as a nurse practitioner, and finally to opening new clinics and managing teams as a clinical director has intertwined with my family's ALS journey in profound ways. What began as an email grew into a meeting, which led to a white paper, and then an invitation from Dr. Hyman Patterson. Together, we've been able to shift the focus from solely research participation to an opportunity for dedicated clinical care for those at genetic risk, building a clinic based on evolving evidence-based practice. This is the work I'm the most proud of, helping to shape the landscape of care for at-risk individuals, empowering them with knowledge and a path forward so they are not lost in the storm of ALS, so that they don't have to fall through the looking glass alone. Next slide, please. My vision is simple: prevent ALS. The path forward is far from simple. That's why I've become even more determined, fiercer than ever. I've pushed myself to do things I never thought possible. I joined martial arts. I released 2 fiction novels with 2 more on the way. And most importantly, I achieved the dream I set from the start, helping to find a clinic for those at risk. The advancements in genetic ALS are remarkable, and they rely on the collective efforts of everyone in this virtual room. I pledge to continue serving the ALS community by engaging those at risk, encouraging research participation, collaborating with the research and care community, and advancing science through both care and research for at-risk individuals. In return, my ask to the ALS science community is to keep breaking down the silos between ALS, FTD, and genetics. Partner with the genetic community, because this is the key to cracking the code of ALS and FTD. We can make this a livable disease. My family, my kids, and I, we're counting on you, we're counting on me, we're counting on us to be fierce. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Allison.